I hate to bring everything back to Islam, but that's a concept deeply rooted in Islam where it's Dar al-Harb versus Dar al-Islam. So until Islam is all over the world, you are in a state of perpetual war. So some people, some economic migrants also consider that a form of jihad. Like, let me go to a kafir country, so to speak, and I will do dawah, and I will convert people, and I will build mosques. And there's levels to the jihad as well. We're heading in a similar direction to France here at the minute, so it is worrying.
Namaste and welcome. We have with us today Nuriyah ji, who is an ex-Muslim and a popular YouTuber. She runs a channel called The Holy Humanist. And we're very happy to have her join us today to talk about what has been happening in France and other parts of Europe, and also how radical Islam operates in different parts of the world. Namaste Nuriyah ji, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Do you see that, there's a difference of approach, where radical Orthodox Islam is concerned in developing countries versus, that in developed or affluent countries? Do you think that it operates differently? They have a different modus operandi?
I think it definitely operates differently because you'll see that in general wherever you see Islam, being manifested. And again, where you're in, let's say, the developing world, you've got, especially in countries like Pakistan, you've got a whole educational system built around protecting the religion and making sure there's enough young minds that are being trained in the religion. So you see it play out in normal day-to-day society a lot more, but you also get those radicalized youth kind of elements and factions to it. And then if you look in the West, I think there's a big difference even between, let's say, my experience here as a third generation British Pakistani Muslim, when I was one, immigrant, versus the experience of somebody who grew up in America as an American Pakistani Muslim. So even like country to country, it differs. And then France as well, you see how, the Muslims are kind of now, letting out their frustrations, let's say, and really mixing it with religion. But if you look at the countries, they do play out differently, but the common thread is definitely underlying radicalization can be found within all of those elements. But in terms of the West, I'd say the USA has done a lot better of a job at assimilating its Muslim immigrants than the UK, for example. We're heading in a similar direction to France here at the minute, so it is worrying.
Interesting. You mentioned that Muslims living in the UK, whether they're second generation or third generation, are different. Those living in UK, for example, are different from the ones in France or the ones who are in US. You gave the example of US. Why do you think that US has been able to assimilate? You use the word assimilate. How is it that they've been able to do that? And everybody's talking about France and, saying that France has not been able to do that very well. So almost as if the dispensation in France is being blamed for its current problems. So how is it that, what is the difference? What can you give us some examples maybe?
Yeah, I think America in general has taken a vastly different approach, and they're also, when it comes to like immigration and things like that, so they're a lot more robust, and they try and they don't take in as many migrants, let's say, as Europe or the shores of England or like France is susceptible to, just by virtue of geography and where people are fleeing from. And then the deals for asylum that you have with those EU countries and the loopholes within them, it does lead to like things like the Calais jungle in France, where it's abysmal. Just the standard of living that people have there, the way they're waiting for months. So America has really done well to attract very skilled migrants. And then they've also, I guess, because it's such a big country as well, that it didn't end up having those enclaves where immigrants are just kind of living together and creating their own kind of, ghettos, like, in a way, without trying to sound rude. But it's like birds of a feather flock together kind of mentality. So even in the UK, when my grandparents came over from Pakistan, they initially settled exactly in the main area where all of their other, all of their kind of community was settled. And then those became the main pockets of London that we know today as the kind of Desi areas. So I think America's done well to not allow that to happen, and they seem a lot more kind of still. A lot of the youth are still involved in school, and whereas here they're turning to a lot of other things. There's identity crisis at play. There's a lot of racist elements, so they have to fight back. There's a lot more of a fight back and fight the system attitude in Europe, I'd say.
True. Yeah, ghettoization seems to be the reason that everyone's pointing to for the situation in France right now, for example. Um, it brings me to a question that is on everyone's mind, and I think has been on people's minds for a very long time. Ordinary folks often wonder, why is it that a lot of Muslims, or now we see the illegal immigrants, for example, in Europe, why is it that these people who are obviously have a proclivity for orthodoxy in Islam, or choose the Sharia or prefer the Sharia, have those kind of leanings, why are these people leaving countries of their birth where they have that, and then fleeing to these developed and affluent countries, Western countries mostly, where they want the same kind of, radical and orthodox Islam? They could have, they might as well have stayed back home, right? Why do they? So is it only economics, or is there something else at play here?
I mean, see that this is the $1 million question, right? And when you put it to them, when they're so staunchly defending things here that they essentially, as you rightly mentioned, have run from in their country of origin, and it's like, why are you trying to resurrect all of the damage and all of the lack of everything that you're trying to think that the West will offer you? So, I mean, a lot of the time there's no, especially even like I ask this to people closely around me as well, because I'm like, we've been here for generations now, and you're still kind of holding on to or glorifying or romanticizing what would happen if we were back home, or if those rules were applied here. And it's obviously the economics and stuff is a stark reality in their face, that they would not be getting supported in the way that they are currently where they are. Even if you're out of employment here, you are still being taken care of. These kind of welfare systems don't operate in their country of origin, right? It's kind of just, you've got to make deal whatever cards you're dealt, you have to deal with, and then you hope you have generational wealth or something like that. Whereas here, if you really do put your head down and work, you can get forward. Yes, the West has problems. There's a lot of underlying issues, but in general, you've got more of an equal chance. And I think it really comes down to this mentality that is, I mean, when I tell you, Pujita, it's ingrained from birth that, it's the us versus them. They are the other. There is something fundamentally flawed in us accepting the Western hegemony and Western systems as the right way to live. Do you see what I mean? And it's just, again, I hate to bring everything back to Islam, but that's a concept deeply rooted in Islam, where it's Dar al-Harb versus Dar al-Islam. So until Islam is all over the world, you are in a state of perpetual war. So some people, some economic migrants, also consider that a form of jihad. Like, let me go to a kafir country, so to speak, and I will do dawah, and I will convert people, and I will build mosques. And there's levels to the jihad as well.
You mentioned dawa. Can you, so, like Christianity, for example, doesn't have a very, clean record. We all know, I mean, anyone who's familiar with the history of Christianity knows that it has blood on its hands. Yet it seems to have taken made a clean break from its past. And now, the efforts to proselytize are based on, sweetness, compassion, concepts which are very, very, attractive to, say, a prospective convert, right? And there's no fanaticism, there's none of that, and there's no talk of violence and all of that. But nobody talks about their past. But there's definitely absolute intent to proselytize. Now, can you tell us a little bit about dawa in Islam, and how is Islam different from Christianity in that respect? Like, do they use deception, which Christianity does use to manipulate people?
Yeah, I think just like any other kind of, especially well, not Judaism. I'd say Christianity and Islam. Judaism is the complete opposite, right? So it's hard.
They don't want.
They don't want you there. Exactly. They're like, prove to us, no, prove to us again, prove to us a third time. Even then, we're not sure. Whereas Islam and
Exactly.
Christianity are like, come here with open arms, like hugs.
Yes, exactly.
But no, it's I know. I wish it was that actually like that funny in reality, because you're right. A massive element of dawah is the concept of deception, and a halal kind of deception, which, I think the Shias use taqiyya, and there's a few other versions for Sunnis, but essentially the whole concept of taqiyya as well in Islam is propaganda, false propaganda, anything in the pursuit of expanding the religion is allowed, essentially, right? So you can lie in that moment, you can deceive, you can, completely just, you can portray Islam to be something it's completely not. And I mean, in the UK, we have a huge dawah scene, and it's mostly these like, young, kind of charged up men, like full of testosterone. That a lot of the time, they're like the we call them here like the rude boy kind of a demeanor that they have. And when you see them going to like public places, like, high speakers corner or something, or when they're setting up their dawah stalls, you can tell that they are trying to prey on people's vulnerabilities and emotions. To, I mean, there are literally white converts to Islam, who they have made say the shahada on the spot. And like, there's literally this video went viral. The woman tried to hug him after she accepted Islam, and he's like, no, no, no. Like, I mean, 2 seconds before that, she has no idea what Islam stands for, what it means for her life. And a lot of the time, these, like, especially when white people convert, they really use them as like a poster girl or a poster boy for Islam. But you will see that most of the reverts within 2 to 3 years, reverts, I don't believe that concept at all, but they
So the term is revert, is it? They come back to their original religion.
because everybody's original fitrat is to be a Muslim. Yes. So yeah, it's pure deception at best. And I mean, most of them, once you learn about it, and hopefully when they come across the reality of the Quran, reading it in their own language, but usually, unfortunately, they realize the reality of it when it's become a problem in their life. So when you're trying to get a divorce, or when you choose to get married, or when he wants to bring a second wife, or something like that.
You would think that the women would be more open to, I want to say criticism of, if not completely, like I mean, people like you will come to that, the movement of ex-Muslims, but within the fold, within Islam, within practicing Muslims, you would think that the Muslim women would be slightly more, critical of the religion, given the kind of, challenges they have to face. But it's entirely the opposite, especially, I mean, in India we see that all the time. There are a lot of women, like the interesting contrast between what's happening in Iran with women just protesting against the hijab, versus in India they want to embrace the hijab, so they're fighting for hijab. So why does that happen? Why are women so stolid in Islam?
It's, women in Islam have so much more to lose when you try and like leave or you speak up about it. I mean, first of all, there are layers and layers and generations worth of misogyny and submission, and things that, Islam tells you your place in society is, or, about your aura, your body, and everything, because it governs every aspect of your life. I mean, even Pujita, there's one section of an Islamic school of thought which has no punishment for women who apostatize, because they don't believe that any women would apostatize from Islam. They just, obviously in Islam, a woman is considered to have half of the intelligence anyway. So they're like, a woman would never read this and think, nope, not for me. But yeah, if you're married and if you've got children, the societal backlash, the real threat looming over your head of honor-based violence, honor killings, people taking the law into their own hands, being shunned from society, being ostracized by your whole community. Usually they've just given you an education and got you married off young, and you're not financially independent. And a lot of people, because of that, even if they, have doubts, it's just you keep parking it, you keep pushing it to the back of your mind, and you just always look at how much do I have to lose versus what do I have to gain here. So it's very hard for women to break out of that fold.
Um, I'm thinking about the diaspora, the Muslim diaspora, right? So the Muslims living in UK, Europe, because that's where it's coming to a boiling point right now. Do you think that there is a difference, that the first generation Muslims who went abroad, who traveled out of the subcontinent and went to places in Europe or America, for example. Do you think they're less radicalized as opposed to the younger generations? I find that the younger generation seems to be more violent, aggressive. If yes, why is that?
Yeah, I would definitely agree with you there. It plays out slightly differently, and I look at my own family to kind of see how it's changed from generation to generation. But like, so I think the first generation that came were a lot more, we've got to get on with life here, and we've got to make it work. But also, they were quite conservative in nature anyway, so they really held on to their culture. But they were very content with like, right, we're in a foreign country. These are our values and our culture. We'll do our thing. We'll go to our halal shops. We'll attend our mosques, but that's about it. We'll kind of stick together. Then the next generation that came in, obviously the world had changed as well. So like when the Taliban took over for the first time, the amount of charging up that was done here in universities, in mosques, the amount of funding also that has poured into the UK from Saudi Arabia, and then they were going to Islamic societies and mosques. And even when my dad was like in his late teens, early 20s, they would get people like him and his brothers together and show them videos of Muslims being slaughtered, and yeah, and really charge them up. But then that did trickle down because my granddad was the imam of the mosque, and then my dad was also quite strong in terms of his identity. So I also, when was growing up within that family, and I wore a hijab at 9. I was so proud to be Muslim. I would,
Nice.
yes. So I mean, I fully fell for it. I do get scared because I really believed in Islam, and that's why I wore hijab at 9, thinking, why is nobody else doing this? But if I hadn't been taken out of London and like been shown the world and lived in the Middle East and lived in Malaysia, I could have gone down a very maybe Shamima Begum route, because that's how seriously you try and manifest your identity. And it's like going to live in Saudi Arabia showed me the world more than living in London, which is crazy. But yeah, it's the identity crisis as well.
Would you care to share some of your experience, if you don't mind, like maybe just one or two? Like, what was the turning point for you? Like, what was it that was like the moment where you decided that this is just not going to work for me?
There's quite a few little like moments of like what's going on here throughout my life. Like when I lived in Saudi Arabia, for example, I was quite young. I was about 10, 11. But when we would come back from Friday prayer, or my dad would take my brother there, and they would talk about executions that were happening after, I would be like, wow, how is this so normal? And then you'd hear about like Chop Chop Square in Riyadh, which was also the main square where they would do beheadings. And they,
Excuse me, the Chop Chop Square.
yeah, it's
It was called the Chop Chop Square.
literally, yeah.
Unbelievable.
That's how, at least had to you
Unbelievable.
about it. That's what we would call it. And basically after the namaz, they would recite, they would like say the name of the person and the crime that they've done, and then what they're going to amputate. So you could stay back if you wanted to watch it. And this was like a normal Friday. So there was like times like that, and then times I'd be shopping with my mom, and she would also have like her white colleagues out. But when we lived there, there was the religious police called the Mutawa. So they would even like tell my mother's friends to cover up, who were blonde women who have nothing to do with Islam. They were already wearing the abaya, but the Mutawa was like, nope, cover your head. And they had to do it. So you have these little moments, and then obviously, when I moved to the UAE, I thought, wow, this is a perfect balance of East meets West. We can go to the cinema, I can drive, but we still hear the call to prayer. We still get Ramadan and all of that, special consideration.
Right.
And then it was only obviously like after my I wanted to get a divorce in my marriage, and they put like a very ancient Sharia law on me, which comes directly from the Quran. So basically, if your wife is disobedient, the lengths that you can go to, and in my case, they were trying to like force me back, and I couldn't leave the house without his permission. So when I realized that that has links directly from Sharia, and where does Sharia come from? It comes from the Quran. Then I read it in English as an adult, and I just thought, from a more legal mind, like, how would Allah in his book allow these men to deduce this? And when I realized Allah's fully giving permission, and then Muhammad in the Hadith is even worse, that was when it was all over for me after a few internet searches.
Was it difficult though, taking that decision? And well, yeah, I'm sure there are a lot of people who do a lot of reading within the fold. I'm sure within the religion, a lot of people who are educating themselves. They see things for what they are, but they still don't have the courage, perhaps, to take the final step. How was it? I mean, was it difficult for you, or did you have a supportive family? Um, you know, uh,
I mean, it was extremely difficult. I remember like when I actually Googled when I had done my own reading, and I was like, am I the only one that thinks like this or has found this out? Because if that's true, we've been conned so massively. It's a big scale. Like I'm talking about generations of our ancestors
yeah.
being conned, and honestly had barbarity done onto them. So I remember when I actually Googled it, and Master Arab's YouTube videos came up, and then I was like, no, there's actually people out there. This makes sense. But I was at my grandma's house, and she actually had like an Allah and Muhammad sign right in front of me. And I remember looking at it and thinking, this will never be the same again. But in that moment, it feels like everybody is kind of living in like the Truman Show. I'm not sure if you're aware,
Yes.
and you're like the only person that knows this.
Yeah. And the only person who doesn't know.
Yeah, exactly. And you just see them, and they're like doing their thing, and they're reading their tasbih, and you're like, am I the only person that's like, no, this is dark?
Get that door out of here.
Exactly, yeah. But then for a long time, I had to keep it to myself. So Twitter really like did help me through that time. And it was only by accident where my dad realized I used the term ex-Muslim somewhere, and then he confronted me, and I thought, you know what? It's time to step up. I'm in the UK. I have a voice to use, and there's enough people that's come before me, so I'm gonna just go for it.
Bravo. Nuriyah, I wanted to ask you, uh, we're from the same subcontinent, and I mean, the Indian subcontinent, but do you, in living in UK, I'm sure you encountered many Indian Muslims as well, right? Um, do you think that there is any difference? Like, do you think that they're less radical than, what is your perception? Or did you mix at all? Were you not allowed to mix with Indian Muslims? How does it work in the diaspora of the Muslim community?
Yeah, that's actually really, really interesting. Because I did most of my schooling honestly out of the UK. I left when I was 9, and I genuinely have a lot more of a connection to the Middle Eastern diaspora. And I've not since I've come back, I've not really honestly had many Muslims friends in general, to be honest, but Indian Muslim friends. But from what I've seen, like in terms of my cousins and everybody that have lived here their entire life, in terms of interaction, it is like I was saying, very much a birds of a feather situation. So you'd see the Muslims are a lot more comfortable with each other, and they discriminate less against whether you're Bengali, Punjabi, Indian, and it's like that uniting under Islamic banner. So there's actually a lot more beef that plays out between like Sikhs and Muslims, or Hindus and Muslims, as we saw in Leicester. So that flares up more because, as I said, in a country like the UK, the Muslim identity almost trumps even their ethnic identity. Whereas like in India, I think that a lot of the Muslims would, well, at least up until recently, would be very happy to call themselves Indian before they're Muslim. Whereas here it
Yeah.
was a lot more, yeah, the other way. And Pajita, just on
So,
your point, sorry, just I just wanted to make one point on when you mentioned the what's happening in Iran. I think when women are when they've got to that point, it's because they've actually tasted being under the rule of thumb of real Islam. So even in Pakistan, you see like women who are very modern, but then they are celebrating the arrival of the Taliban in Afghanistan, and they're trying to put a bit more of a dupatta on their head. And it's like, if that transposed over the border to Pakistan, it would become eventually what's happening in Iran. And it's the same thing in India. Until you've tasted Islam,
Exactly, exactly. So a lot of Indians, from our side, kind of question the Muslims who are so outraged. There are a lot of very modern Indian Muslim women who are speaking so vociferously for the hijab because they present it as an argument for choice. They say that this is choice. It's not about good or bad or religion. It's about a woman's choice. If she wants to wear, why not? So that's how they play it out. But the thing is that a lot of people counter that by asking that, well, if you want the Sharia, have it in the full force, right? Have it in full form. You want it only parts. You only want parts of it that you want. But if that's probably a good counter, because if the Sharia were to really apply to the Muslims in this country, then what you saw in Saudi Arabia is probably what's going to be witnessed by a lot of Indian Muslims here in India.
oh yeah, precisely, exactly. And it's always glorifying it until it happens to you, because
Absolutely. Um, what about this ex-Muslim movement, right? There is a slow change that's happening. It's a very quiet, or I don't know, is it quiet? Is it open? I really don't know. And since you're part of that, um, well, for want of a better word, movement, what can you tell us about it? Because a lot of people in India don't know that it's happening. And again, like I said, Indian Muslims have a very, very warped idea of what Islam is. There are many, many proponents of, people who follow the religion, who from the faith, who have a very rosy view of what Islam is. And they'll deny a lot of things and say, well, that's not true, or jihad is not this, jihad is actually, and give you a very softer version or the meaning of jihad, etc., etc. So, my question to you is, how big is this movement, this ex-Muslim movement, and what can you tell us about it?
yeah, sure. So, thank you for obviously even having me here and giving like a platform to that movement, because I do think like it is we are becoming slowly but surely a force to be reckoned with. So, when I say like we're growing in numbers, isn't like we're exponentially increasing. What I mean is like holistically, if you look at the ex-Muslim movement now, I always say like pretty much 24 hours a day now on YouTube, in some language or the other, you will find somebody criticizing Islam, like without a doubt. And I'm talking whether it's in the French speaking world, and we know how wide that the scope is for that, whether it's in the Arabic speaking world, which is, very unheard of even 10, 20 years ago, and then obviously in the English speaking world. And it's really like, I mean, social media has given us like such an amazing opportunity to do what the printing press essentially did to Christianity. Because, as you were saying, Pujita, like even these women in India who, would vastly, wholeheartedly stand up and show that this is my right to wear hijab, so how dare you infringe on that? So I even agree, right? And I say obviously a woman should be allowed. So just because of the power of the internet now and having pushed the boundaries of how much we can criticize Islam, at least I can show those women how ridiculous is the origins of the hijab. Let's just talk about how Umar ibn Khattab was spying on one of Muhammad's wives while she was out, doing her business at night. Like, if you think that that's a pious and great, divine command, then go ahead. But a couple of years ago, Pujita, we couldn't laugh about this. We couldn't have these
True.
memes of like, this hadith has now been, spread far and wide, and it really makes Islam look bad. It makes you question. Yeah, go ahead.
We still can't talk about it.
Yeah.
We still can't talk about it in India. I don't know if you're aware of this young lady who has been she's in hiding now.
Yeah.
She can ever live fearlessly. Like, I mean, she's this young woman she was on her way to becoming a political leader, a lawyer. And now you can't even, I mean, people have been beheaded in India just for supporting her on social media. Beheaded. So in a country like India, which is a democracy, and where everybody today is painting painting it as if this country is persecuting the minorities. I mean, that nothing could be farther from the truth, because people can't speak out. So even today, a lot of these things cannot be. A kafir cannot speak about aspects of the hadith or quote, from the Quran, because that's what happened to her.
And that's exactly that's exactly where you're right, Pujita. It's when a kafir, or it's when somebody who's left the fold speaks. It's like, even, it's something that they cannot tolerate anymore, because this is, and we know, even with the Nupur Sharma case. I mean, when it was Hinduism that was being put under the microscope like that, or made fun of, she was expected to bear it. And it's just
Yes,
when it's flipped around, it's this is the this is the modus operandi of how you deal with criticism of Islam. And that's why,
exactly.
like, we have to get to a point where we say, okay, how many Nupur Sharmas are you going to silence? How many Nuriyah Khans are you going to silence? How we're just going to keep coming. How many ex-Muslim Sahil are you going to ban in India?
Right, right, absolutely. Have you ever had any encounters with women from the other side, like Muslim women from the other side, who are still rabidly clinging on to Islam, and how do they view you? I mean, how have you ever had any encounters with these women? Like, how do you convince them? Do you even have like a logical argument with them?
To be honest, I've checked like the most of the feminist Muslim on YouTube and on social media, and I mean, Pujita, where do you start when it's like already a chicken holding a KFC meal deal sign there? Like, where do you begin to engage? So again, all I try and do as my little contribution to this movement, especially focused on trying to liberate women, is I just keep trying to push out, keep making just the ridiculousness of it known, and how dark and depraved these commands are relating to women, prepubescent girls, because somewhere in the mind and heart of a woman, you are going to feel a little bit sick inside when you read a hadith that says, Muhammad consummated marriage at 9. You can justify it. You can try and bring every defense. You can use all the apologetics. Women matured faster, blah, blah, blah. She consented, all of that nonsense. But at some level, in this day and age, especially if you're living, in a society where that's completely unacceptable, something inside your stomach should turn. And I'm just hoping that you'll, at some level, some seed will be planted, or the humanity factor will kick in, and you'll get to a point like I got to, where you can't have that cognitive dissonance anymore. You can't live with that.
Do you have some sort of like, do you have women reaching, or men or women reaching out to you, who are in distress? Do you have some sort of a, what you call it, system where you reach out to them or help them out, if not any other way, but just to counseling? Do you have any of those? I mean, do you do that, or
Yeah, so we have
as part of?
individuals who like reach out to us, and then what we try and do is, again, with the whole like holistic way the ex-Muslim movement's going, people come and then they tell us about them doing specifically counseling for freedom from religion, or dealing with religious trauma. And you've got organizations like Faithless Hijabi who also do that. So in terms of a movement, we're kind of building up these networks, and then you've got Pakistani ex-Muslims who are getting like Twitter spaces, and then Discord support groups. So you kind of, like, anyone that comes to us, we kind of, push them towards a community where but again, so much vetting is required. You've got to be very careful. You're dealing with death at the end of it. So
Absolutely.
yeah. So
Very, very challenging.
yeah, exactly. And there has been people who do pretend to be ex-Muslim, and everybody's pushing their own agenda. So it's a very. I try and keep my. You can contact me, and then I'll push you towards the official channels. But yeah, be careful on social
Wow,
media.
that's like it's like there are traps all around, right? You need to be so careful. It's like a minefield of. I mean, you never know who's out to get you. You're right,
Yeah,
especially since I think I mean, you don't conceal your identity and you're pretty outspoken. So I doff my hat to you, but it must be tough, right? because you need to be so careful.
Yeah, for sure. You do just change your general lifestyle. You get so serious about privacy. I've moved to a different area, just to not be recognized there so much. You do have to take all of these precautions, and like I said, that's exactly why I don't open up to other social media platforms, just to minimize that risk. I mean, you are one doxing
Absolutely.
away from ending up like Nupur Sharma, or even like when you're dealing with the likes of people like Sahir and those ex-Muslim Indians who came out, and people were trying to dox them, and you're playing a very dangerous game. You're playing with people's lives here. So,
True. So one last question, Nuriyah ji. How do you see, where do you see this going, especially, and I speak of what's happening in Europe right now, because everything is on the boil. Do you think that the West is going to fold and this wokeism is going to be their undoing, or do you think that they're going to be able to take control of the situation? Countries like UK, for example, or do you think they're well past the mark of being able to do anything about it? Do you think they're, it's too much water have that's gone under the bridge.
yeah, it definitely seems like it's already a bit got out of control, and we're a bit too late. But I am an optimist, and I would think that the UK government is going to look around at what's happening in other parts of Europe and learn by example from, just their immigration, their asylum policies, what's happened in France, what's happened in Germany, the way it's spilling over to the UK. But as you said, like this unholy alliance of Wokism and Islamism, it is a very unholy alliance, and I'm just waiting for
Yes,
that
it
bubble
is.
to burst. But it doesn't seem to be. It just seems to be, garnering more and more strength. And then you get people like myself who are kind of left, politically homeless, and we're like, just hear us out for a moment. But again, we don't really yield any positions of power, even as an ex-Muslim community, to come out and say, well, we've got issues with this as well. Like how this is infringing on your very Western civilization, everything that you fought for all these years. But I mean, I need the UK government needs to definitely start taking back all of this ground that they've kind of over to the Islamists. And I'm talking about like a hard approach that what France had taken even after Charlie Hebdo and things like that. Like vet your mosques, vet where the imams are coming from. If they're from Saudi Arabia, if they're coming from Syria, if they're coming from Yemen, limit what they're preaching, get their preachings translated in English, because some of these mosques here are de facto operating parallel Sharia courts, within their mosques. So, I mean, it's becoming, you just see how far it's gone already. But I am forever the optimist, and I do hope there is time to relinquish some control back.
Wow, I do hope so too. And well, we can only hope for things to get better. And and really, I do hope that because we have our own challenges here in India, as you're probably well aware. And for us, the unholy alliance is not just Wokism and Islamism. It's Wokism, Islamism, communism, and Christianity, evangelical Christianity. So that we have lots of enemies. It's a cocktail of sorts, right? For disaster. So we have our task cut out for us. But one can only hope that, and I think our side is gaining strength surely, but slowly but surely, and so hopefully we'll be able to fight this battle and come out strong. So Nuriyah ji, thank you so much for giving us your time, and I wish you more strength, more power to you, and
Oh, thank you.
uh,
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure talking to you. The time flew by, and yeah, I would honestly like to pick your brain about a lot of things as well, like just subcontinent related. But I always think it's beautiful, how we can have these like kind of discussions, especially coming
yes.
from across the border and just moving the dialogue forward. So I really, really respect that. And yeah, thank you for having me again.
Thank you so much. And to all our subscribers who are watching, those who have been subscribed but are still watching, please subscribe, like our video, share, please share widely with your friends, and please keep coming back to us for more content. Namaste and Shubhratri.
Please remember to subscribe to us and switch on the notifications for this channel. For our other social media links, more content, and to support our work, please visit citti.net. Dhanyavad. Namaskar.